Good morning, everyone, from Fort City, Pennsylvania. This is Chuck King on Monday, February the 1st, 2021, bringing you the Genesis study. We're in chapter 7 today, going over these wonderful scriptures that give us insight from the beginning. And now we are ready to see the judgment of the flood of Noah. Remember, Noah was around 500 years old at the end of the genealogy in chapter 5. And the Lord has announced that he would give 120 years only, that he would strive with men. And now we see we're to that place where Noah is the only man who has found favor, righteous man who has found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And God has given him the plan for the ark. And now we see that Noah did, verse 22 of last chapter, Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So Noah was an obedient servant of God. And we don't have all the details, but it was over 100-year period or more, between 100 and 120 when this took place. We don't know the exact, timing of the end of that genealogy in chapter 5 with Noah's life and when he was given the revelation to build the ark. But we know, we're going to see here, that he was 100 years old or 600 years old when the flood water came. So at the end of chapter 5, he is 500. So over about 100-year period, Noah is preparing for the flood. Let's go to chapter 7 and verse 1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time." So of the entire human race at that time, roughly 1,700 years after creation, things have so deteriorated with wickedness, aided by this demonic influence that we talked about yesterday, affecting the population and its wickedness and continual sin and violence. Only Noah was righteous. He was from the line of Seth, the line of the Messiah, and he's the only one left on the earth that God considers righteous. And so the Lord tells him in verse 2, "You shall take with you of every clean animal by sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and his female, also of the birds of the sky by sevens, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made." Verse 5, Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. So the Lord gave him a week warning, a 7-day warning before the rain would begin, to gather up all these animals. And notice Noah already knew what was clean and unclean. So that wasn't just something from the old covenant law, but it's a revelation that God gave to his early people. We don't know much about that, but they knew what was clean and unclean. Everything they knew was from God's revelation. They knew nothing else. Just like we are, the only important things we know are what God has revealed to us. And so Noah obeyed the Lord. And look what it says in verse 6. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. So there's that timeline. At the end of the genealogy in chapter 5, Adam's genealogy, he's 500. Now he's 600. So that's where we get that 100-year period of him building and preparing the ark for the flood. Verse 7, then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. So there were only 8 of them, and they went on the ark. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. It came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. So God's prophecy of 7 days was accurate. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, that's very specific, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So we see the 2 sources of the huge volume of water were not only rain that fell for 40 days and 40 nights, but the fountains of the great deep, huge water supplies under the earth. And even scientifically, they have even recently proven that there's still huge amounts of water deep down under the earth's surface. And so God, probably through volcanic activity, opened up those plates on the earth and allowed all that water to come out, even while it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It had to be a huge amount of water, not just what rain could produce on the earth. Verse 13, on the very same day, that is the day that all that water started coming up from the ground and also from the sky, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. Notice you never hear the names of the women. They named the guys. They were the head of the family and the way the genealogies were written. And they and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after its kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind. I like that term, creeping things. It seems to cover reptiles, amphibious, even some insects as well, creeping things. And every bird after its kind, all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life. So we understand that God actually brought all of these living creatures to the ark. It wasn't like Noah had to go capture them. God supernaturally brought them to Noah. Verse number 16. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. So the Bible clearly says that God closed the ark up, shut the door of the ark. Verse 17, then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. So over 20 feet higher than the highest mountain. That's how deep the water was. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from the man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So for about half a year, a little less than half a year, 5 months roughly, that's how long the flood water stayed over 20 feet higher than the highest mountain. And Noah and his family and the animals, living creatures on the ark, are the only ones that survived that judgment. Let's keep going in chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts of all and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. So now God is going to take the water away, or cause the water to be taken away. Verse 2, all the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. So there was a lot of water coming from both under the ground and above the earth in rain, form of rain. He calls them the floodgates of the sky. And God stopped that. Now, I like to recommend Answers in Genesis, aig.org. Answers in Genesis there are others, tremendous Christian organization that does a lot of teaching, has a lot of information on their website about the young earth, which I believe in the young earth, not billions and billions of years or even hundreds of thousands of years, but I believe what the Bible teaches of the 6 days of creation. It seems like all the personalities of Scripture also believe that. And we know that God has revealed this to us. And it's fascinating to see the contradictions that Answers in Genesis points out in the theory of evolution that man has made up. Of course, the motivation of the theory of evolution is atheism. It wants to prove that God wasn't involved as creator, and therefore it just was chance or probabilities, that all these things just came together over billions and billions and billions of years. Well, Answers in Genesis has a lot of proof and a lot of evidence for the young earth creation. And they talk a lot about the volcanic activity that must have taken place when this flood occurred. There must have been a horrific upheaval and change of the Earth's plates. It seems to be that all the land was in one place before the flood. And through this volcanic activity and the flood activity, worldwide flood activity, horrific changes. I say horrific, they were horrific because it killed everything, but tremendous topographical changes and changes in the ocean, changes on the land. And the landmass seems to have broken up into what we see as continents. And they have found evidence way down near the Antarctica, drilling down into the ice of tropical forest, remains of trees and tropical plants that must have come from a different place when that land was not forced down there by the activity of the flood. And we know that the climate was much different. The atmosphere was much different before the flood. And this is why we believe people could live for 900 years or more. And immediately after the flood, their ages started dropping off because the atmosphere wasn't conducive to long life like they had before. And these are certainly items of faith, but we know there is evidence, scientific evidence that clearly supports the young earth. And we know that these fountains of the deep and had something to do with volcanic activity that changed the whole surface of the world. Now, verse 3 says, the water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the water decreased. There's that 150 days again. In the 7th month, on the 7th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. So enough water had receded that the ark rested up in that mountain range called Ararat. The water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So after three more months after the ark came to rest, the tops of the mountains were now visible. There's still a lot of water, of course. And then it came about the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. So it was, you can imagine what a raven was doing, going around probably eating floating dead things that were on the water. It had to be a lot of that after all those animals and human beings had died. And then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of the earth. And he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So Noah is sending out these birds to see if how extensive the water remains on the earth, and he knows there's still water. He could probably see water from the window of the ark, but he doesn't know how much of it there is. Verse 10, so he waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark, and the dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. So it had picked a leaf from an olive tree. So Noah knew the water was really receded to the point where the tree was out of the water. Verse 12, then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. So this dove was telling him, messaging him, that the water was receding. And finally, when the dove didn't come back, he knew that it found comfort on dry land. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. So he apparently couldn't see very well from this little window, but once he removed the covering, then he could see the ground was dry. So it was the 601st year, in the first month, that the land was dry. And we see that in the 7th month, back in chapter 8, or earlier in chapter 8, that the ark rested. There was still a lot of water. So this was at the beginning of the next year. So it took almost a whole year for the water to go away, even though the ark was out there the water was on the land for about 5 months. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. And God spoke to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and your wives with you. Bring with you every living thing of flesh that was with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by their families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal, of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So now we have this covenant that God makes with Noah after he comes out of the ark. And notice that, no, I didn't give you the exact time. You can figure that out probably from Googling it, of the exact amount of time that the water was on the earth, but it was quite a significant period where even after the water receded, it took time before Noah could come out of the ark. So they were living on that ark and eating on that ark. It must have been a difficult situation, but they persevered. And they all came out, and immediately, what does Noah do? He builds an altar and offers blood sacrifices of clean animals. So he has knowledge. Remember we talked about Abel having knowledge from God about what the right offerings would be, and he gave offerings from the animals. And Cain knew the same, but he brought offerings from the cursed ground. Now we see Noah knows about giving blood sacrifices to the Lord. This is before the law. Yet God had revealed this to them. And God is expressing here to Noah that he will not bring about a flood, a universal flood, ever again. And he declares that the intent or the inclination of men is evil from his youth. So there's the carnal nature after the fall of Adam. But God says, I'll never destroy everything again in the flood. And he makes a promise that everything will remain the same, even though men are so evil. So these are chapters 7 and 8 here of Genesis, telling us more about the judgment of the flood. And we know that it really happened. This isn't just some fascinating story or some cultural myth, but it really happened, and the evidence of the worldwide flood is everywhere on the face of the earth. And even though the evolutionists try to spin it in another direction, the land layers, the layers of that are there from the flood are evident everywhere on the face of the earth. And so if you want to study more deeply into this, I recommend Answers in Genesis that you can read for many, many hours, their articles and their teachings about the young earth as the Genesis account tells us. We believe in the divine authorship of this creation narrative here. So that's chapters 7 and 8, and we'll go on from there. Please share the teachings with your family and your friends list on YouTube and also on Facebook. And we're going to keep seeking the Lord. We have this day today, the beginning of a new month, and we should be encouraged, not discouraged, but encouraged that we are getting closer and closer to seeing the Lord face to face, to having that kind of fellowship with him that he intended from the very beginning when he met with Adam in the Garden of Eden, that face-to-face fellowship that we read about in the book of Revelation in the New Jerusalem. And we know that is coming. His word is true. Every prophecy will come to pass. Don't be discouraged by politics or circumstances or attacks on your life, but keep looking to Jesus. He's the author and the perfecter or finisher of your faith. May the Lord bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.